Okay, so we move on to the second paper this morning by Dr. Heather Diack, who's Associate Professor of History of Art, Photography and Visual Culture at Toronto Metropolitan University, an active curator and arts writer. She is author of Documents of Doubt, The Photographic Conditions of Conceptual Art, which was awarded an inaugural Photography Network Book Prize, and co-author of Global Photography, A Critical History, and co-editor of a special issue of the Journal of Photographies entitled Not Just Pictures, Reassessing Critical Models of 1980s Photography. Her current book project interrogates the role of art in relation to the humanitarian crises of forced migration in the context of the 21st century. Over to you.
Thank you. I want to say thank you, first of all, to the organizers of Fast Forward and also the museum here in Thessaloniki. I'm so happy to be here, and it's such a special thing to be in a room full of people with shared commitments to rethinking, to researching the role of women in the history of photography. My talk today, there will be some photographers who are certainly familiar to you, so it is less about retrieving them from the past, but rather thinking about the way that they have been historicized or not, right? So thinking about the way that history is constructed. Okay. Maria Elena Valente da Cruz's evocative mid-century gelatin silver print focuses in closely on a jagged black hole amidst a shattered window pane. A Brazilian photographer, Valente da Cruz was a member of the Sao Paulo-based amateur photography group Fotocine Clube Bandeirante. This print was included in Sarah Meister's acclaimed Fotoclubismo exhibition at the MoMA in 2021, notably one of the few inclusions by a female photographer. The image and its subtle gradations of light and shadow captivates. Entitled O Vidro Partido, The Broken Glass from 1952, fractures emanate away from the sharp opening. Moisture has gathered on the surface. The image crops out part of the window's frame, creating yet another exit, a possible space pointed to beyond the upper right-hand corner. The photo succinctly embodies one of the central paradoxes of windows and, by extension, of photographs. They are tricky entities. On the one hand, suggesting access, on the other, presenting a barrier. In these ways, I recognize something deeply feminist in this photograph, and I want to know more about Valente da Cruz. Glass, as a figure, as a metaphor, as a metonym, as a material, plays a complex role in the history of photography, and moreover has specific connotations to feminist practice. My preoccupation with these associated meanings makes sense in part because I'm a photo historian, and glass has played a long-standing role in both practical and creative ways in relation to photography, whether by way of lenses, glass plates, the illusion of the window onto the world, or the glass screen of a mobile phone, to name only a few possible connections. It makes sense, too, that glass captures my imagination, given the fact that I identify as a woman and a feminist, one who frequently wonders about the ironies of the so-called glass ceiling. That sometimes invisible, yet always claustrophobic architecture that constrains and restrains a woman's possibilities in the world. Glass fascinates additionally by virtue of its ability to hold oppositions in tandem, to be at once hard and unbending, and yet also breakable and sharp. More than a reflective membrane dividing the inside and the outside to let light pass and vision to take place, or an image to be doubled, glass in this context insinuates gender barriers, thought invisible, made tangible, bringing haptic realities into view. Writing for the New York Times in 2017, Teju Cole provocatively proclaimed, "The history of photography is a history of shattered glass," setting up a scene of intrigue. Using a press photo made in the post-massacre aftermath of the Las Vegas concert shootings on October 1st, 2017, in which 58 people were killed and 100 more injured, Cole, in his reliably evocative and concise way, notes the piercing detail of the broken windows, shot through by the assailant and shot vertically by the photographer, calling them a pair of gouged out eyes. From here, Cole notes how glass is everywhere in photography, and yet, despite the ways Cole's words resonate with some of my own thoughts, another crucial, albeit absent, detail that stood out for me while reading Cole's short history of photography was that, namely, his narrative is almost exclusively masculinist, with mentions ranging from Eugene Ager's reflective vitrines to Lee Friedlander's sly self-portraiture, filled with refractions and transparencies, with many male photographers in between. Glass, writes Cole, is present not only as photography's seductive subject, but also its physical material. André Kertész's photo of Paris, A View over Montmartre, featuring a damaged glass plate, and Brett Weston, the son of Edward Weston, his photograph of a broken window in Paris are given ekphrastic attention by Cole, offering a notable byway into photography's history, while also outlining the established patriarchy of that same history. The lone female figure who enters Cole's narrative is the avant-garde German photographer Ilse Bing, with her broken window in Paris from 1934. And in addition to the absence of women in Cole's article, thinking of Bing's work led me to ask whether there is a difference in register between the meaning of a broken window photographed by a woman as opposed to anyone else. The false sense of transparency given by glass is reason enough to pursue the matter further. And to my mind, it offers a means of escaping any view of objectivity that pits itself against the possibilities of subjective symbolism. Would a photograph of glass, either in whole or in parts, signify differently if created by a woman? Is there a meaningful way to articulate an important difference between Weston's black hole and Valente de Cruz's ambivalent chasm, for example? I think so. And I say this even as I also want to argue against any essentialized version of femininity or feminism. On this front, I am in agreement with the art historian Carol Armstrong that there are indeed optional and described gendered references of particular aesthetic decisions, which is to say, not only that the way something looks in a photograph has meaning, but additionally and more radically, that formal aesthetic choices carry enormous political consequence. As curator Eva Respini argued in her 2016 Aperture article entitled On Defiance, How a Generation of Women Artists Broke New Ground in Abstract Photography, a striking number of women artists have distinctly disrupted the dominant idea of the photograph as an observation of life. In other words, as a window onto the world, by using techniques of abstraction and material experimentation. In this vein, my paper today offers a close analysis of the appearance, metaphor, and material of glass as a feminist strategy that cuts like a shard through traditional male-dominated histories of photography. Glass in this context interrupts the glass ceiling. As opposed to fragility, glass within a feminist photo history centers resistance. Even in the absence of visible breaks and cracks, all photographs are, of course, fragments. And yet, like vessels, they hold weight. The Italian photographer Tina Modotti was acutely aware of this, and her interest in the metaphoric status of the things she photographed relays a keen sense of photography's haptic edge. Much has been written of the nuances of her roses, 1924, and her Workers' Parade, 1926, for example. One featuring concentric rings of lush petals and the other a rhyme of rounded sombreros. Each functions in their own rights as stand-ins for political mobilization in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution. Little writing exists, however, on the hallucinatory strangeness of her glasses, 1924, also known by the title Experiments in Related Forms, from the same period. Here, Modati's careful attention to form, visible in her use of multiple overlaid exposures, disperses meaning across a series of reflecting and intersecting contours. Like Rose's, Glasses is an experiment with the repetition of form for political purpose, balancing formalism with socially engaged content, deploying the aesthetic dimensions of the image to buttress ideological meaning. With Glasses, it is difficult to discern where one vessel begins and another ends, or whether one goblet sits within or beside one another. They rely on one another. Like the indented peaks of the Mexican hats, arguably a male synecdoche, our gaze is drawn in, and we are confronted and confounded with icons of revolution. Stronger en masse, these formidable glasses entrance optically, even as one imagines the pierce of a high-pitched clink in a moment of cheers, or the smash of a collective collapse. The story of Modati has too frequently been told by way of her relationship to Edward Weston, as muse, as protege. Today I'm following in the footsteps of scholars such as Andrea Noble, Carol Armstrong, and Monica Bravo, by outlining an oppositional path, rather than seeing Modati's tightly cropped studies as being synced with Weston's, as a complement or a facile counterpart. We can instead identify their challenge. By contrast to Weston's signature single object still lives, Modati sought out groups. Moreover, as Bravo explains, unlike Weston's preference for precious prints, Modati made photographs destined for reproduction, willing to sacrifice precision of vision to obtain a larger audience. Modati's distinct new vision mode of aesthetic choices both underwrote and unconsciously undermined the program of the straight photograph as Weston began to develop it in the years during which they were together as a couple. In Modati's photographs, there is more than meets the eye, in part because her photographs invariably implicate the hand in the desire to feel the apparent volumes. Modati's feminist edge, her disruptive potential, comes from the ways her photographs appeal to the hand by contrast to a lack of discernible distance from the eye. Namely, her adherence to the surface of the photograph, yet unwillingness to identify that surface with pristine form, optical clarity, pre-visualization, or technological mastery. Shifting surfaces and precarious opticality similarly underpins the work of American photographer Bernice Abbott, whose under-recognized radicality has been acknowledged by scholars such as Terry Weissman, Gael Morel, Sarah Miller. Best known for her portrait photographs from the 1920s and 1930s, for her documentary series Changing New York, Abbott's subsequent turn to science as a photographic subject has been largely below the radar of dominant photo histories. I'm showing you here a photograph from her little-studied work for the Physical Science Study Committee at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the late 1950s. Entitled Wave Pattern with Glass Plate, a photograph which refuses any clear dichotomy between art and science. As art historian Colleen O'Reilly recounts, Abbott's scientific work commits itself strongly to a physical relationship between natural phenomena and photographic technology, but one that has hitherto evaded analysis, partly because of our long-standing reliance on indeterminate categories for representation. More than an inverted looking glass, the visual paradoxes here resonate beyond reductive, polarizing oppositions. Cascading ripples run across the photographic plate within a glass tank and are interrupted by yet a second glass plate that has been added to observe the physical effect, but also to intervene and shape the behavior of light. Whereas most scientific photos are taken for granted as transparent windows through which we see autonomous data, in Abbott's scientific photographs, mediation is foregrounded. This document of physics is not about capturing the laws of the natural world per se, but by contrast, making visible a set of constructed physical conditions. To quote Riley, "The visibility, not the suppression of image-making techniques, facilitates knowledge," end quote. Part of Abbott's photographic experimentation with glass is precisely about exposing process, and by extension, being reflective, literally and figuratively, about visual systems and structural dynamics, a gesture which resonates distinctively with feminist visual strategies. Cuban-American contemporary artist Antonia Wright uses cyanotype methods as a means of exploring notions of history and difference, feminist protest, and symbols of systemic violence. Harkening back to the early botany experiments of Anna Atkins, the richly colored prints are strikingly seductive. But beyond the hypnotic hue, they contain another, more cutting edge. Revisiting the 19th century technique keys into the retroactive and hazardous climate of post-Roe United States, where many states, including Florida and Arizona, to name, many, at this point, more than half, are reenacting laws on women's bodily and reproductive autonomy, recriminalizing abortion, rolling things back centuries, beyond the 19th century. Whereas Atkins' specimens sprawl and reach for the edge of the print, Wright's image radiates along the fractures of shattered glass. To create these unique cyanotype prints, the artist hammered a glass sheet laying atop chemically treated paper, resulting in a direct contact exposure to the sun. Against deep cerulean blues, each set of lines floats outwards, tracing direct encounters with real objects, though they nevertheless appear as abstract recordings of the presence of light. Cameraless photographs are a reversed tone inversion of the natural order of things, explains photohistorian Jeffrey Batchen. They even appear to emit their own light, to emanate rather than to record their images. In part because of their autogenerative ability, cameraless photographs have long been treated as second-class citizens in the history of photography, at the margins. In this way, Wright's return to experimentations that deliberately evade the bounded confines of the camera, physically breaking open the space of the image, and thus she contributes to a necessary reassessment of the weight placed on technology as the driver of photo history. Instead, Wright's cyanotypes reaffirm the unstable object that is the photographic image, and emphasize the desire to write with light that is essential to photography's boundary splintering force. It is not the first time the artist has used glass to feminist effect. In the single-channel video, Suddenly We Jumped from 2014, we watch Wright's naked body thrown through a pane of glass on a slow-motion loop. She is catapulted face first through the ceiling, against the force of gravity, shattering the tauntingly see-through and yet dangerously cutting barrier of the glass ceiling. The plural we of the title summons mobilization once more, a joint leap of faith implicating the viewer in the act. Wright's project recalls a long lineage of risk and female critique in art. Think, for example, of Barbara Kruger's frequently reproduced montage, You Are Not Yourself. Sourced in appropriated images, we see an analogy of troubled female self-reflection and the pressures of conflicting roles. In Kruger, the fractured glass mirror represents the cracks of psychological dissociation. Wright's intense shatter, on the other hand, offers a moment of emancipation, as opposed to crisis. Here, as in Valente de Cruz's close-up photograph of pierced glass, the shatters in glass become apertures for possibility. The 9 photographic panels of American artist Lorna Simpson's 9 props evoke glass as another channel to scrutinizing gender and racialized paradigms of looking in photographic terms. With 9 props, a title which is suggestive of devices to enable stability, Simpson presents an homage to James Van Der Zee's 1920s and 1930s studio portraits in Harlem, as well as an enigmatic celebration that both refers to and obscures its subjects. Considering Van Der Zee's archive carefully, Simpson decided to conceptually isolate the glass objects she found in his images. Any bottles, vases, bowls, or drinking vessels staged as props in Van Der Zee's portraits. Then, Simpson had gaffers blow replicas of the objects in black glass, which she photographed and had printed on felt using a heat transfer process. The images of these surrogates are exhibited in a grid accompanied by captions that make direct references to the original photographs by Van Der Zee. So I show you here one example, Bow of the Ball from 1926, and you can see this wide phallic vase with flowers coming out of it in this portrait of a gender non-conforming trans person. And then you see the vase in the upper center on the top row. So alluding to the nuances of the performance of gender, as well as a challenge to heteronormative assumptions. Photohistorian Sean Michelle Smith has noted how Simpson's measured use of text and image reappropriates one of the signal tropes of anthropology, namely the objectifying gaze of taxonomy. The glassware used by Van Der Zee in his photographs serves as aspirational signifiers. Isolated as subjects in their own right by Simpson, these glass objects become stand-ins for fragile futurities and anthropomorphic bodies analogized in glass. Reflective, but not transparent, Simpson's use of black glass recollects Van Der Zee with a difference, as it probes the material nature of photography and the politics and complexities of black representational space. Treating the glass forms like bodies, and by extension, her photographs as portraits, Simpson endows these enigmatic glass objects with a liberating sense of density and gravitas. Glass as subject and material in Modati, Abbott, Wright, and Simpson offer a foray into thinking more deeply about the multifaceted, mutually affecting connections between form and feminism. I could have mentioned others. Florence Henry and Barbara Caston come to mind. Each of these feminist photographs are provocations. All this to say, I am interested in pursuing a new history of photography that reimagines the presumed stakes of form and even formalism, a history that interrogates metaphor alongside metonym, complicates the binary divide between optics and haptics, and moreover, cracks through the factious yet ever resistant medium of photography with feminist force. Thank you.